Support and resistance basics. Pivot points. What are pivot points? All you really need to know about pivot points, also known as floor pivots, is that they are known price levels that can act as support and resistance. The good news is that they can be easily and quickly calculated in an objective way, so you won't have to spend any time worrying about where they are. Pivot point formula. Forex traders are usually interested in daily and monthly pivot points, with daily pivot points being of more common interest. Pivot points are calculated according to a formula which takes the previous open, high, low, and closing prices into account. So if we want to know at which prices today's pivot points are going to be at, we just need to know yesterday's open, high, low, and closing prices. If we were calculating monthly pivot points, we would need to know these same prices for the previous month. Pivot point calculator. Most charting software packages include an easy-to-use pivot point indicator that shows the pivot points on the screen. MT4 does not, but you can download an easy-to-use, free indicator from several sources to do the job. Pivot point trading. Some traders use trading strategies based only on the price's relation to certain pivot points. Very short-term traders, known as scalpers, like to use pivot points to make small, fast profits under certain conditions. However, FX Academy recommends that pivot points are best used as additional indicators to give extra weight to a support and resistance level that has already been identified by some other means, as an additional indicator within the I-rate criteria. One of the advantages of using pivot points is that they are objectively calculated, and so in theory, every trader sees the same thing. This is basically true for monthly pivots, but daily pivots can be different depending upon the time zone used by charting software. For example, a chart that is set to GMT will calculate tomorrow's pivot points using opening and closing prices from midnight GMT, but a chart set to EST will use midnight EST, which is pretty likely to show a different price and so give different results in the calculation. Be aware that most traders are using either GMT or EST. So the daily pivot points produced by these time zones will usually carry the most weight. Several different levels can be calculated as pivot points, but the most common structure is a calculation of the 7 levels. We begin with one level in the middle, which traditionally is seen as a fair value price for the day or month. This level is simply called the pivot. It is the average of the previous period's close, high, and low prices. Above that, 3 resistance pivots, labeled in ascending order, R1, R2, and R3. Below the pivot, 3 support pivots, labeled in descending order, S1, S2, and S3. The resistance pivots are traditionally supposed to act as resistance, and the support pivots, of course, as support. There is no reason why resistance can't turn into support, and vice versa. That's all a trader needs to know about pivot points.